I've never killed anybody in my life, but I will kill you because you're with me. I will kill you and I will hide you and I will cut you up and put you in the dirt right now.
Newly released audio from Cassie. An alleged drug mule testifies. Evidence of damaged rooms and cash. And did we just find out when this trial is going to officially wrap up? Tells us a lot about whether Diddy will actually take the stand. It is a full recap of today's events in the Sean Combs criminal trial. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law&Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. That's right, Morgan & Morgan, they're investigating claims that patients were improperly warned about this risk. It's free to check, just takes a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or head on over to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. It's been a weird week in the Sean Combs criminal case, right? You got one day off, then you had one day where a juror got sick, so there was really no trial. There was a shorter day today, and a lot of evidence for the jury to consider, including the testimony of this alleged drug mule. Although I'll tell you, I don't know if that's the proper moniker, as he's been made out to be. We'll talk about it. You have a Homeland Security investigator who took the stand, and you have a lot of digital evidence. And prosecutors are getting to the close of their case of racketeering, sex trafficking, prostitution, these charges that Diddy's facing. So what happened today? Well, for that, let me bring in Elizabeth Millner, Law&Crime's in-court reporter, for more. Elizabeth, so good to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time. I always say this, before we get into the testimony, there's always something else I have to ask you about. I have to ask you about something that has been circulating. This is something that came out earlier on in the trial. This is something that I believe the defense had cross-examined Cassandra Ventura Fine about. And it's this audio tape. It was this audio tape that was played in court, but it's the first time we have all heard it. And it is where Cassie, again, alleged victim number one in this case, her testimony arguably supports the racketeering charge. She makes up one of the sex trafficking counts. She makes up one of the transportation to engage in prostitution counts. In this tape, she allegedly threatens a man, I believe a man named Sujit, over him viewing a sex tape of her, a freak off. I want to play a quick portion of it, then I want you to put into context for it.
No, you playing games, and now we're never. Now all my friends can go, and we can stay here.
All right.
Everybody can go, and we're gonna stay here. Everybody heard. So they're all leaving, and we're staying here until you show me that. I'm going to kill you. You don't understand. I don't give a I've never killed anybody in my life, but I will kill you because you're with me. With me in my life right now. If I saw a video of you doing anything that you didn't want people to see, I would show you the video so you could tell me what the happened. You're playing games with me, telling me you saw some. Now you're saying you didn't see some. You with me. I'm going to you up. I don't think you understand. And it's not going to be my hands, and it's not going to be blood on my hands. Someone else is going to do it. So you have to tell me right now, and I'm recording this whole FYI, tell me what the you're talking about. So you have it or you don't have it? Can you just be clear with me? Do you have it?
I saw it and I don't want to ever see it again.
I know you don't, but I want to see it.
Yeah, but I don't want to see it, bro.
Yeah, you don't have to see it, but it's my life and I'll kill you.
Yeah, but
no, I will kill you if you don't show me right now. I will kill you and I will hide you and I will cut you up and put you in the dirt right now. Pull it up. If you have it, pull that up. Because if not, I'm going to kill you and then he's going to kill you again. So just do it. Pull that up right now.
Elizabeth, why is that important to this case? And also, you and I were talking about this. There seems to be a misconception about what this tape is and is not. Put it into context for us, and what is your reaction to this clip? Why is it important?
So while this was a clip that was recently released to the public, it is an audio clip that was played out in court. So the jury has heard it. Both sides have heard it. People who have been attending court have heard it. And just to kind of put it into context for all our viewers who are kind of unfamiliar with this particular recording, it's Cassie confronting, I believe, a club promoter named Sujit. And this was around the 2014 timeframe. Sujit had let Cassie know that he had come across this sexually explicit video of her. And Cassie was upset about this. She was really trying to get to the bottom of how he obtained this video of her and what all this video was of Cassie, again, in this sexually explicit video that Sujit allegedly had. And so she was confronting him, just saying things along the lines of, I'm going to kill you, and if it's not going to be at my hands, and just that she was super mad, just that there might be, the sexually explicit video of her just circulating out there, that other people have obtained it outside of, her personal devices, that type of thing. So as far as this audio recording goes, it really seems like it can work for both sides, right? The government side, mainly because Cassie can be heard just very upset about somebody coming into possession of her sexually explicit video. But then it could also work on the defense's side, right? Because when Cassie was on the witness stand, she was very quiet. She was very soft-spoken. Then the jury hears this clip where she is, going pretty hard at Sujit, saying that things like, I will kill you, and if it's not going to be by me, it's going to be at somebody else's hands. I'm going to get somebody to do this to you, that type of thing. So it really kind of shows maybe the stark contrast between her testifying while on the witness stand, but also just her demeanor in court too. But then also you kind of have to think about just the time frame, right? This being about 10 years ago. Cassie, while she was on the stand, 38 years old. So just doing the quick math, she was about 28 years old, really just mad that somebody might be in possession of her sexually explicit video. I am surprised though that this is now just being released, because it was heard in open court during Cassie's testimony, which was at the beginning of the trial. But I think maybe the defense released this particular exhibit just in their many exhibits that they have been releasing here and there, especially as the trial is coming to a near. But just putting into full context, there has been some misinformation about this particular audio clip too, as far as I've seen posts where people think it's Cassie confronting an escort, those types of things. It is none of that. It is Cassie confronting a club promoter who she thought was her friend about the sexually explicit video that he says that he came across of her.
Yeah, look, the jury heard it, right? So for the defense's perspective, yeah, it doesn't fit neatly, right? For the prosecution, it doesn't fit neatly her being a defenseless victim of a sex trafficker that in this tape, she's allegedly saying, I'll use him, I'll get him to kill you. Not great. On the other hand, and I think you really touched upon it well, the prosecution could say she did not want this tape of her getting out in any way. So if Sean Combs is the one who's threatening to release sex tapes of her, like she said he continually did, particularly on an airplane, I still think that's one of the most important pieces of evidence in this case. If the jury accepts it, they're on an airplane, he has tapes of her, says that he's going to release them, they land, he demands a freak off, he gets a freak off. I think that's more the concrete evidence of sex trafficking. The prosecution can say, look how afraid she was of it. Look, she's threatening somebody over it coming through. She is so afraid of this tape getting out, and it goes to the coercion aspect that Sean Combs would have released it too. What did you expect her to do when he's threatening to release it? Although, look, at the end of the day, that audio, the jury can't get past what she said and how she said it. Okay, so we move from there. Now we got to talk about Brendan Paul. This is somebody who has come up a lot in the last year, maybe even year and a half in the Sean Combs saga. His name has come up in civil suits before. He is this former basketball player at Syracuse, turned Sean Combs' assistant, testified under immunity, by the way. He was granted immunity earlier on in the week. I want to take his testimony in a couple of pieces here. So first talk to us about who he is, his arrest, right, and how he even got hired, and then we'll talk about what his actual job duties were.
So right off the bat, the prosecution is kind of asking Brendan Paul how long he'd worked for Diddy. So he started kind of in late 2022, and then his last date of employment was March 25th of 2024. And that is a date for people who have been following this case pretty closely, they kind of recognize that date because it's around the time frame of the HSI raids on both Diddy's Miami home and his Los Angeles home. But that was also the day that Brendan Paul was arrested for cocaine possession at an airport. And it was kind of a big deal. It was a story that we had covered here at Law&Crime. And so I thought, okay, they're starting right off the bat with the arrest. I was like, where is this going? But then the prosecution kind of talked a little bit about Brendan Paul's responsibilities, his tasks, his work life, and working with Diddy. So interestingly enough, Brendan Paul, we already knew he was kind of a basketball player. He was somebody who had recently graduated college right around the time frame that he had started working for Sean Combs, aka Diddy. But also I thought something that was interesting, it seemed like Brendan Paul was kind of into music, as far as he had built a music studio from hand, I think over at maybe his parents' home, that type of thing. But he learned of the position in 2022 through Eli Maroon. And Eli Maroon, like a lot of other assistants, they've been kind of talked about, but we haven't heard from them as far as testifying goes. But it seemed like Eli Maroon was kind of the connection between Brendan Paul and him getting the job with Sean Combs. And so the jury, as well as the parties and the public who were inside the gallery or at the gallery, did see an exhibit photo of Eli Maroon. And I think an interesting point is right off the bat, Eli Maroon told Brendan Paul around this time frame to get in, to get out. If you have a girlfriend or something like that, a significant other, to just break up with them, because just this is how much the job really entails. You're kind of on call 24/7. Again, something that the other assistants have testified to. But essentially, if you're working for Sean Combs, that becomes your entire life. And so Brendan Paul says that he was interviewed for the position around late October to early November of 2022, and the interview took place at Diddy's Los Angeles home. Christina Korum and Frankie Santilla were at Diddy's home office for the interview. Frankie Santilla was Diddy's music manager, and so the jury saw some exhibit photos to refresh their memory a little bit about who Frankie Santilla is, as well as who Christina Korum is. Again, a name that's been brought up pretty much every single day of trial. However, we have not heard from her ourselves in terms of her testifying. And so he says the interview was only about 20 minutes long. He was hired on the spot. He had to go home for a little time frame because his father was battling some medical issues that were going on. But then within a couple of weeks, he was already starting. And so he worked at the beginning out of Diddy's home in Los Angeles. And I thought also an interesting thing too, Jesse, is that when he was working with Diddy, that his place of residence was kind of bouncing around through Airbnbs, whether it be Airbnbs in Los Angeles, Airbnbs in Miami. But as far as his introduction, or his big introduction to Diddy himself, that happened kind of within 2 to 3 weeks on the job. Again, something that other assistants have testified to, where those first couple of weeks are really a trial period to see if you can handle being Sean Combs' assistant, and then you kind of get the real introduction into who he is as a person and just meeting him while on the job. And so from there, he says his direct supervisor was Christina Korum. He said that she ran the enterprise, and you could take it kind of both ways. She ran the criminal or alleged criminal enterprise, or she just ran the Combs enterprise, which is what it really is called. And so he says that as far as just Diddy and Christina Korum together, that they were two people who communicated every single day. As we've all noted, she was kind of like his right-hand gal. Like, they were always on the phone, they would text, they would call, they would FaceTime. And then Christina Korum was somebody who also would use Diddy's business phones too. And so it seemed like, as far as just their role, or Brendan Paul's specific role as being a personal assistant, it was kind of like the other assistants do, where it's like long hours, long days, but you guys are there to work for Sean Combs, and anything that he needed, you guys are there to go get it for him.
And didn't he say, my whole job is to make sure Mr. Combs was always happy, and I didn't take no, and he couldn't take no for an answer, which, by the way, Elizabeth, is very similar to what David James testified, one of the first witnesses, the former assistant. He said, when I started, I was told it's Sean Combs' kingdom. We're all here to serve it. I think that goes to racketeering, right? We're all here together. Our common purpose is to benefit Sean Combs, to do whatever it is he wanted, to help him, to protect him. And I think that that's the more that you hear about this. And by the way, didn't he go through like a binder of different associates and assistants and people that work for Sean Combs? I think that helps with racketeering, right?
I think you can kind of see it both ways, because if you're talking about RICO in general, the tasks that are being kind of described in open court, it really seems like, okay, if this was maybe another celebrity who was kind of at the helm of this, that maybe, okay, are they fulfilling assistant duties, or are they doing something criminal and they don't know it? And so it kind of had a little bit of gray areas, I think, at least with Brendan Paul's testimony. As far as just his normal tasks on the job, it was to make sure Diddy was on time, to make sure he had his meals, because Brendan Paul was an athlete. He used to play basketball. He would help Diddy get his workouts all together. He said, as far as the responsibility goes, because it's not just him being the assistant, right? It's other people too, that he said that we all had the same responsibilities, but we all did the task based off our strong suits. And so we see some exhibit photos of the different assistants, such as Jonathan Perez, who had testified just last week. We saw Frank Rodriguez, who was a butler. As far as just the difference between the butler and the personal assistant, it was kind of the similar role. But as far as just the butler goes, he was really just right there whenever Diddy needed it. But kind of same as the assistant too. Then we saw another exhibit photo of Joey Chavez, who was another assistant. The assistants would talk amongst each other, either again in group chats together in person or in FaceTime. Then there were some more exhibits kind of admitted into evidence. We saw an exhibit photo of Fahim Muhammad, who works for Diddy's security, and somebody who also would kind of make sure that if Diddy needed cash, the assistants would go to Fahim specifically, where we've seen messages from Jonathan Perez messaging Fahim, aka Fa, and these group messages talking about money or reimbursement, those types of things. And then we also saw an exhibit photo of J9, who was the security guard, but he also worked as a driver. So kind of similar to what the other assistants have testified to, George Kaplan, Mia, David James, is that they did work very, very long hours, 80 to 100 hours per week. And for everyone who knows, around the normal time frame, it's about 40 hours per week for us regular folks. But for Diddy's staff, and especially his assistants, they were to put in the long hours. That was kind of their requirement, and they always had to be on call, according to Brendan Paul. But he says for his time frame working with Sean Combs that he only worked about 4 to 6 days per week, which is still a long amount of time. He says around at the start of his employment, he was making about $75,000, and then towards the end, beginning in January of 2024, he was making around six figures, $100,000, working as a personal assistant. And so we saw kind of the exhibit as far as the spreadsheet goes, and it was just the pay assigned to the different assistants, and we saw how much Brendan Paul was making in his biweekly paycheck, which were about $4,000. Then they kind of start to get into a little bit of just more that the role entailed, such as drug use, such as traveling, such as, things like club appearances, where Diddy said he would do club appearances for also six figures, around $150,000, and that he didn't do it as much when Brendan Paul had been working with Diddy. He says that Diddy only did them maybe about 8 times during his 18-month employment. And so it seems like even though Diddy and Brendan Paul may have on surface had a good relationship, Brendan Paul also mentioned, like other assistants, that Diddy had fired him a couple of times. And again, he'd only worked for Diddy for about an 18-month period, but Brendan Paul testified that he had gotten fired about 2 to 3 times during his employment. He said there was one particular instance that happened in October or November of 2023 where he said he forgot Diddy's Lululemon fanny pack. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And so what Brendan Paul did was he went to Lululemon, which, by the way, is like kind of for those who don't know, and I think a lot of people know what it is, it's like an activewear type of store, very expensive, very pricey, and they have great yoga pants, by the way. But anyway, that Brendan Paul actually went to Lululemon to purchase a fanny pack for Diddy because Diddy was upset that the Lulu fanny pack wasn't given to him by Brendan Paul. He said that this was one of the few instances where he saw Diddy get very angry in terms of his demeanor goes. Brendan Paul says the reason he got his job back after being fired for just kind of a brief moment is because Christina Coram told him to advance a room for London. And Brendan Paul mentioned that HR a couple of times during his employment forgot to pull his taxes, at least for the first 6 to 8 months that he was working with Sean Combs. And he says that if there was ever an issue that normally HR would be involved in, it wasn't that case kind of working for Sean Combs. Instead, if there was an issue, that he would either go to Christina Coram or he would go to Sean Combs directly. And he never really worked or never really saw HR in that type of capacity kind of take over. Right. And I thought that was kind of an interesting point, especially given that, the defense may feel like a little different of a way.
Well, here's the thing. It seems to me a couple things from this. Number one, forced labor is one of the underlying predicate crimes of racketeering that the prosecution is hoping to prove. So when you hear about these extreme working conditions, we heard it, also from Mia. We heard it from other witnesses. Mia said she was sexually assaulted by Sean Combs when she was working for him. That would help to maybe prove that. But also, I understand that the defense may be calling the former head of HR to rebut against this idea. Of what these jobs, what these assistants were supposed to do, what was expected of them, how their pay, how they were ultimately paid. And so I can see why the defense is going to try to fight back against this. But Brendan Paul, whether we're misnaming him, mislabeling him as a drug mule or whatnot, there's a reason, right? A big part of his testimony centered around drugs, and a big part of his testimony centered around the Wild King nights that Jane had described. And if for a moment we assume, based on the prosecution's case, that these wild king nights, or freak-offs, if you're talking about Cassie Ventura, if they are crime scenes, if they are scenes of sex trafficking, forced sexual episodes, that Sean Combs used force, fraud, or coercion to induce these women to engage in sex acts with commercial sex workers, then his alleged role in this is very, very important. It goes to the idea of racketeering conspiracy. It goes to the idea of him helping to facilitate and cover up these crimes, right? So talk to us about what he had to say about drugs and what he had to say about wild king nights.
Well, obviously, I was very interested in hearing all he had to say about drugs, especially because of the nickname, it seems, that we in the media have kind of given him, that being an alleged drug mule. And that is only in reference to what he was named in Rodney Little Rod Jones's civil lawsuit that was filed just last year. So in terms of just the drugs and everything that Brendan Paul had to say about drugs, he said that he saw Diddy using drugs. And these were drugs that, you know, we've kind of already known about, that he saw Diddy at times using cocaine and ketamine, ecstasy and marijuana, which other witnesses have testified to. Brendan Paul said that Diddy's drug use, he saw Diddy using drugs, I should say, maybe about once a month, but he did say that he had noticed him, you know, possibly under the influence of drugs, possibly high during other moments too. And so then we see an exhibit photo. It's taken in early 2023. It's of Brendan Paul's hand, and he's holding some pills and some powdery substance, and it was ecstasy and 2C. And what is 2C? It's something that was also kind of referred to in Little Rod's civil suit. It's kind of a mixture of ketamine and Molly, and then it's put together like with this pink powder for an aesthetic reason. And so it's pink, but it's ketamine and Molly put together. And so again, that photo was taken in early 2023. Why he was taking this particular photo is because he was sending this photo to the other assistants because he didn't know where to put these particular drugs, and that was the reason that he was taking it, not because he was necessarily selling it to Sean Combs or anything like that. And so he says that he had also purchased drugs for Diddy, like weed, 2G, ketamine, ecstasy, cocaine, and he said he was instructed to purchase these particular drugs by Diddy. And so there were things like, as far as Diddy personally liked, such as weed, where he spent maybe $4,200 on it, which is a lot of money for that. And he would normally buy his marijuana or weed from Phil Pines. Phil Pines was a former assistant of Diddy, but he's somebody that other witnesses have testified that he would also kind of sell them drugs such as weed from time to time too. And so Brendan Paul said that he even bought K-Pops for Diddy, which I think are like ketamine pops, and those were anywhere between $300 to $500, and that the assistants would obtain the drugs by texting the drug dealers such as Guido's, drug dealers such as One Stop, and then even drug dealers such as Avi or Ovi, and then another drug dealer named Baby Girl. And so we saw exhibit photos of Guido, the drug dealer, who was based out of Los Angeles. Brendan says that he saw him at Diddy's home maybe once or twice during his employment. And then we saw some text messages of conversations between Brendan Paul, Jonathan Perez, who was another assistant, and then Baby Girl, who was the alleged drug dealer. And these messages were from February 20th of 2024. You see Jonathan Perez message, "Hey, Baby Girl, putting you on a text with Brendan, Puff's other assistant, think he needs something," and then he sent a bunch of heart emojis. Then Baby Girl responds, "Is it for you or for Puff?" Brendan Paul responds, "It's for Puff, but you can say it's for me." And Brendan Paul said that he would say those things mainly so that way people wouldn't possibly take screenshots or send these messages to other people, really, so that way Sean Combs could kind of be a little incognito in terms of if he did need kind of, you know, his drug fix, pretty much. And so then once Brendan Paul would get the drugs, he said that he would give them to Diddy, or he would put them in Diddy's Gucci pouch. And so we see an exhibit photo of Diddy's Gucci pouch, something that we've seen before, where normally kind of the drugs, either prescription or other recreational drugs, would be put for Diddy's use. And so Brendan Paul said that he would also get prescription drugs and pick them up, and they would either be under the name Frank Black or other names. And then the government kind of asked Brendan Paul randomly about Cialis and picking up Cialis, and Cialis was kind of another form of Viagra that that Diddy would ask Brennan Paul to pick up, or somebody would ask Brennan Paul to pick it up for Diddy's behalf. And so then we start to see exhibits, more text messages, because there's a lot of text messages that are shown. These particular messages were between Diddy and Brennan Paul. They were from February 14th of 2024, so last Valentine's Day, or I should say the Valentine's Day before last, where Diddy said, "You get me Zans." Brennan Paul responds, "Still working on it, have two leads, should be able to get it by tomorrow." And the 2 leads he testified to were just possibly reach outs that he had reached out to drug dealers in order to get the Xanax for Diddy. And so he said drugs were normally paid for in cash, either from the Gucci pouch, or security would provide the cash in order to pay the drug dealers, and that he would tell Fahim, again Diddy's security guard, that he needed cash for PD, and they would normally just kind of talk about it through text messages. So what do we see? More text messages, and they were between J9, Christina Coram, Fahim, and Brennan Paul, where Brennan Paul writes, "Hi, following up on a cash reimbursement. KK is aware. $4,200 for flour, $125 store run for personal items, $85 for online personal, $750 for personal Gucci items." And what those personal Gucci items are is normally, according to Brennan Paul's testimony, were hard drugs. And so the total being $5,190, which is a lot of money. But Fahim said, "Okay, we got you," when Duke comes in. And that was somebody that I guess kind of helped in order for Brennan Paul to get this reimbursement. And so as far as just Brennan Paul and his drug use goes, he says before working for Sean Combs, he normally would just, or not normally, he said previously he had smoked weed in the past, but there was one particular time when they were at Coachella together that Brennan Paul actually tried Tucci. And Brennan said that he had never tried it before, but he wanted to prove his loyalty to Sean Combs, so he said he tried it. And interestingly enough, Diddy had asked him if this particular drug was good, and Brennan, I think, just agreed to it, but he said he didn't take enough for it to really have, I guess, the effects that maybe it would have on other people. But he said that he wanted to try this just so that way he could prove his loyalty to Sean Combs. So as far as what Brennan Paul understood these Wild King nights to be was that it was Mr. Combs and a significant other. They would go off to a hotel for the night, and he knew it had something to do with alcohol and sex and partying. And so there was an exhibit shown only to the witness, that obviously being Brennan Paul, and it was a photo of Jane that we did hear about. We didn't see the photo or anything like that in court because of it being sealed. But so Brennan said that on a few occasions he would set up these Wild King nights, and he would help even with the cleanup. He said that Christina Coram didn't really want Brendan setting these up for Diddy, and said that he only did these during his 18 months of employment with Sean Combs about 3 or 4 times. And he said that he knew that they happened at hotels prior to Cassie's lawsuit. Then when Cassie's lawsuit happened and it settled in November of 2023, that's when the hotel nights moved from hotels to private residences. So either Sean Combs' residence or even Jane's residence in some instances. And so there was one particular note. It was in one of the exhibits. It was a note about PD schedule for the week from Christina Coram, and it said Wednesday 2/8, that being February 8th, finance meeting at house. Jane arrives early Wednesday and going to hotel. PD doing dinner with Jane for her birthday. Be ready for Wild King night at her hotel. Just finalizing hotel today. And then Thursday it says no work, most likely Wild King night continued. And so he said that Wild King nights would happen in Los Angeles, they would happen in Miami. The hotels would be booked under assistant names, or they would be booked under Frank Black, which is Diddy's name that he would use for either to get prescription drugs or also to book hotels under this name. And then we saw another exhibit, that being a text message between Christina Coram and Brendan Paul for February 9th of last year, where Brendan Paul writes to Christina Coram, PD active now, running to Walmart for them. Christina responds, like Wild King mode active or Gucci bag active. Brendan Paul responds, in between the two. And Christina says, copy. Brennan Paul says, if that makes sense, LOL. Christina responds, LOL. And so he says as far as just his role in setting up these Wild King nights, it would include setting up the toiletries, the food, the alcohol, the candles. He would bring lights and oils, the Gucci pouch, which according to him had drugs in there. And that he was just pretty much kind of getting everything together in order for Sean Combs and his guests sometimes, most likely according to Brendan Paul, that being Jane, would come to these hotel nights and that they would kind of do these wild king nights. And so then we see a cabinet in her bathroom of Diddy's home, and it has a whole bunch of baby oil in it. Brendan said that he took that particular photo to send over to the house manager in order for the house manager to get everything all organized. And Brendan Paul said that he would pay for supplies sometimes with his own personal credit card, but he got reimbursement, again, something that other witnesses have testified to, and that there were times where he would give Diddy cash for these wild king nights, including $5,000 that he got from security in order to give to Diddy for these wild king nights. And so there are times that even Diddy contacted Brendan during Wild King Night. So we see an exhibit photo of outfits from like a sex store that Brendan Paul was going to go and pick up some lingerie for I guess, for Diddy's guest, and that being Jane, and that Diddy requested Brendan run to the store to get outfits for her. But then once Brendan Paul was there, he sent a photo to Diddy, and then Diddy didn't respond, so he just ended up leaving. And so even just in terms of cleaning up these very long nights, Brendan said that he would have to even use gloves to clean up because of just sanitary issues and sanitary reasons. But his job was really to just kind of throw away the baby oil, all the liquor bottles. He said their main role was so that way they could avoid getting damage charges to the hotel. Now, did that always happen? No, there have been some receipts that we saw where it was damage to the linens or damage to the furniture, that type of sort. But there was one exhibit that we saw, which was the hotel room after a Wild King Night. In this particular photo, you can see kind of white sheets everywhere. The hotel room it looks rearranged. I'm not necessarily sure if it was rearranged, but it was just kind of an empty hotel room. Looked a little bit messy, but Brendan said that he would even leave cash tips for the hotel staff too, maybe as kind of an I'm sorry for all the mess that you have to clean up afterwards. But those were just kind of Brendan Paul's responsibilities and roles when he would have to set up and even clean up Wild King Nights.
Yeah, there's a couple of things to that. I mean, with all the drugs, we have to remember the allegation was that Sean Combs had used drugs to keep victims compliant. We also know that drug offenses, drug trafficking, are, again, another underlying crime of racketeering. So the more that you talk about assistants like Brendan Paul, who helped with that, it goes to racketeering conspiracy. And, you know, if you also talk about helping to set up these alleged Wild King Nights or whatever you want to call them, again, if we assume they are crimes, we assume they're sex trafficking events, again, it goes to both of those charges of sex trafficking and racketeering, covering up, again, illegal activity using aliases. This is such important testimony. And by the way, I will say, I have to believe the idea of Sean Combs switching up from having these nights in hotels and then having them in residences. You could make the argument, well, this is all about him trying to be a private figure. You know, this is all, he's a celebrity. He wants to, especially after the lawsuit, he wants to be more private. The other way of saying it's consciousness of guilt, right? He knows he's committing criminal activity and he's trying to cover it up and have it in his residence. So two different ways to look at it. The defense cross-examined him, right? They cross-examined Brendan Paul. I think it was Brian Steele who did the cross. They were very specific and limited in the questions they asked, right?
Yeah, it really was, and it really kind of felt like a very quick cross-examination. I really thought that Brendan Paul would be on the stand for most of the day today, and that didn't even end up happening. And I always feel like when the defense is cross-examining witnesses that they kind of like and that they didn't say anything bad about Sean Combs, they're a little easy on them, especially, you know, coming from Brian Steele. I saw how his cross-examination went with Mia, but seeing him cross-examine Brendan Paul and even some other witnesses that I think that Sean Combs liked a little bit more, he takes it pretty easy on them in terms of the style of the cross-examination, because right off the bat, he was asking Brendan Paul about him being such a hard worker and that he excelled in both athletics and academia. And so they brought up his basketball career at Syracuse. And then Brian Steele is like, okay, well, is it true that you received academic honors? Brendan Paul says yes. Okay, you took this job as a great opportunity. Brendan Paul says yes. You were going to meet with a billionaire, true? And Brendan Paul says yes. So I think putting little nuggets there where they either refer to Sean Combs by his status back then as either a billionaire or an icon, you know, music mogul, you know, Sean Combs being Sean Combs, aka Diddy. I think a lot of a lot of the times that the cross-examination kind of starts off that way, is in terms of that these witnesses, these former assistants, were just glad to be working for Sean Combs, that they never witnessed anything criminal. They never witnessed any apprehension from Jane and that types of things, because because that is where the questions were really going towards. So right off the bat, Brian Steele was asking Brendan Paul, so you made it clear that you weren't a drug mule. And then Brendan Paul is like, absolutely not. And then Brendan Paul says that he believes, drug mules are traffickers. He doesn't think that that was necessarily the case in his instance, because the defense says that around this time when he was working with Diddy, that Brendan Paul only got drugs for Diddy about 5 to 10 times over an 18-month period. And so they say, putting that into context, it wasn't very often that Brendan Paul was getting drugs for Diddy, especially not enough to be considered an alleged drug mule, none of that sort. And so then the defense is kind of like, okay, well, you think that this was for personal use, right? You don't think that this was going to go and sell off to people, none of that sort. And then Brendan Paul is like, yes, that's my understanding. And so the defense then asked if whether or not Christina Quorum is a drug user or not. And then Brendan Paul confirmed that she wasn't a drug user. So I think also kind of honing in on the idea that all the drugs that were obtained by the assistants for Sean Combs were used for his personal use, because then when they kind of get into the Wild King nights, Brian Steele is like, okay, well, did you think it was his personal time, the personal time being those Wild King nights? And then Brendan Paul says, yeah, I thought it was his escape. Brian Steele asked, did you ever notice Jane to be hesitant or apprehensive? And Brendan Paul said, I did not, no. Did you speak with Jane after the nights that she wasn't, and whether or not she was a willing participant? And Brendan Paul says that he believed that she was a willing participant and that she was completely fine after these really long Wild King nights or hotel nights, whatever you want to call them. And then Brian Steele asked, okay, well, you mentioned on direct that Christina Quorum ran the enterprise, and you don't mean a criminal enterprise, right? And then Brendan Paul responds, correct. And so Brendan said that he didn't think that Wild King nights were criminal, and that when they kind of talked back about the whole alleged drug mule kind of name that he's been called for a while, he says that he really kind of cares about his reputation, and that Brennan was only caught with 0.7 grams of cocaine during his arrest in March of 2024, and that Diddy didn't even know that Brendan Paul had drugs on him, neither did Christina Quorum, and that the defense was saying that this entire arrest was pretty much a mistake, mainly because Brendan Paul said that he had the drugs in his possession and that he was planning on moving them to another bag. Then he got caught up in his work responsibilities, forgot the cocaine was even there, and so when the arrest happened, they find that that amount of drugs on his possession in his backpack. He completely forgot it was there, and then obviously the arrest happened. We've seen everything from his mugshot to the body camera footage of his arrest, but according to him, it seemed like everything was a mistake, and that his heart actually dropped when the police found the drugs in his possession. But he said that he didn't necessarily tell law enforcement who these drugs actually were for, because he wanted to prove his loyalty, and he didn't, it seems like from his testimony, didn't want to get Sean Combs into trouble. And so then the defense kind of ends on Brendan Paul participating and helping with the Love album, the Off the Grid album that Diddy had released just a couple years ago. And that in terms of him staying up for 3 days, he was like, it wasn't something that I really wanted to do, but I think under Brendan Paul, he said because he was around 23 when he was working for Sean Combs, that he could just handle it. It was totally fine with him. He didn't think anything of it in terms of possibly, what the government is trying to say where it's forced labor. According to Brendan Paul, it seemed like this was just something that he was able to do because he was a young 20-something. And so then the defense mentioned as far as Diddy using drugs, whether or not Diddy was more creative when he was using drugs in order to make his music, and that he used these drugs to be creative while working on that particular album. And so then they kind of end on, okay, well, through everything you've gone through, do you feel indebted to Sean Combs? Did you have a good experience? And then Brendan Paul said he did have a good experience, kind of like a yes or no type of answer that he had. And then as far as just the final question that Brian Steele had for Brendan Paul, it was, even without immunity, would you be here telling the truth? And there was an objection by the government. That objection was overruled. And so Brendan Paul said yes. And so that was really the cross-examination, really just kind of poking holes into what the government is alleging, that he was doing all of this, like either forced labor or carrying drugs for Sean Combs. But according to Brendan Paul, it didn't seem like he was doing anything criminal at the time. especially when it came to these wild king nights and his role in helping setting them up those few times he did.
Yeah, the defense really trying to pour some water on this idea of this being a criminal organization, a criminal enterprise, and that the drugs and all of these things were, part of an ongoing criminal pattern or ongoing sex trafficking operation. I think the best way to explain it is, I know that when he was questioned by the prosecutor on redirect and was asked, what are your feelings towards Sean Combs? He goes, it's complicated. I think that's probably the best way to say it. This is complicated. Now, I want to move on to the next witness. So my understanding is there was an investigator from Homeland Security who took the stand. And talk to us about who this person is, because for me, when I'm reading about the testimony, it seems it's really supporting the idea of transportation to engage in prostitution, right? Sean Combs faces 2 of those charges, the allegation that he literally transported sex workers, male performers, commercial sex workers, and alleged victims for the purposes of prostitution, for the purposes of sex work. So travel receipts, right? Things like that, the flow of money. What did this investigator have to say about that?
Yeah, so if you've been following kind of what Special Agent Alyssa Penland did in terms of the summary chart and the flight chart for Cassie whenever she was with Sean Combs in terms of their relationship, well, think about Joseph Cercilio, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and think about it with him on the witness, but with Jane. So it was exactly the same thing, kind of in terms of us seeing flight records, credit card records, text messages, bank records, all that were picked out by the prosecution team. However, it was his role to check it for accuracy in terms of just everything that was in these summary charts. So it was another day after Brennan Paul got off the witness stand of just summary charts. But really, I think the prosecution trying to connect those dots in terms of just who was flown out where, at what time, the text messages that are kind of corroborating that somebody did indeed fly out to a specific location, whether it be Los Angeles or Miami, for the purposes of these Wild King nights or these hotel nights, those types of things. So the first flight record that we saw, because they started in May 22nd of 2021, and they go all the way to August 8th of 2024. Now, is every single hotel night included in this specific summary chart? No, according to the government, it's not every single time, and there are breaks in between dates, but that doesn't mean that a hotel night didn't happen. It was just something that they just didn't include on the summary chart. But for the first example that we saw, it was between May 22nd of 2021 through May 23rd of 2021. It was a booking at the One Hotel in Miami, Florida, in the presidential room of room 1118. The names associated with that particular booking were Jane, Sean Combs, and Dawn. And then we saw that there was a flight booked for Jane on May 21st. Of 2021, and that was a JetBlue flight from Newark Airport down to Miami, and that there was no financial transactions, because that was kind of one of the columns also listed in this particular summary chart. And in terms of why there was no financial transaction, Joseph Cercilio, he testified that it could have been a cash transaction in terms of why nothing was written in that particular box. And so the rows show that even kind of they skipped through it just a little bit, that they showed before Cassie's lawsuit that these hotel nights would occur in hotels, and then after Cassie's lawsuit again, November of 2023, that the location of these hotel nights took place in either residences, that being Jane's residence, sometimes Sean Combs' residence too. So I think one thing that stands out when the government is presenting this particular summary chart is that because it has to deal with Jane, we don't get to see all the exhibits like we were seeing whenever Cassie's summary chart was all put together, which is kind of unfortunate. So I'm really just kind of taking everything by ear in terms of just what they are talking about. And so they were shown specifically to the jury, obviously both parties and the witness. However, we weren't able to see them because they still have sensitive information that all relates to Jane. And so we heard about one particular exhibit. It was the One Hotel record, and the name was, the hotel was booked under Phil Pines, which was a former assistant of Sean Combs, and that total cost was about $3,000 and a little more than $3,000.90. And so then we hear about another travel record for Combs Enterprises, and this entry was for Jane. Then the jury saw a screenshot of Jane's boarding boarding pass for that Miami flight. Then the jury also saw like a video that was taken from May 22nd of 2021, but because of UTC time, it was really taken on May 21st of 2021, as well as accompanying exhibits such as AT&T phone records for a 9922 number, and that number was associated with Sean Combs. And so it seems like the government, just similar to how they were doing with the last summary witness, is really kind of showing that this all happened, and we have the text messages, video exhibits, and then we also have documentation to show that somebody did indeed fly out to whatever respective location it is in order to participate in these hotel nights or these Wild King nights, whatever you want to call them. And then the jury was able to see in a particular exhibit, this was a loss for hotel damages for the amount of $6,000. So $6,000 of hotel damages that the jury was able to see. Unfortunately, we in the gallery were not able to see that particular exhibit, but I don't think it was a photo. I think it was just kind of a record of the amount of money for this particular hotel damage. And so then we see flights also for other dates, that being December of 2021, where flights were booked for Jane, flights were booked for Cabral, an escort or entertainer that Jane and Sean Combs would use together, according to Jane's testimony. Then we saw financial records, or not we saw, but the jury was able to see financial records for Cash App transactions, such as on December 5th of 2021 for $350. The subject was Mr. Star, and the recipient was C for A. And you can't help but think C for A means Cowboys for Angels, in kind of a service that was used in order to book these men to come to these hotel nights. And so then we hear about these exhibits from December 2nd of 2021, still kind of within that time frame, where Diddy is asking Jane, can you get on a red night? Jane is saying, oh, my baby. And then later down the line, she's saying, okay, well, let me text KK. Then we see, we hear about another message from December 5th of 2021, where Cabral is messaging Jane, good morning, I'm here at the airport. Jane is saying something along the lines of, okay, well, have you landed, got your bags, that type of thing. And so the special agent also testified that there were some sexually explicit videos that were also on these charts with these exhibits. However, they weren't shown to the jury today. I assume that they might be shown later on to the jury, possibly on Monday. But as far as them seeing any sexually explicit videos, that didn't happen today. But as far as just the hotel damage that was shown in some of these summary charts, there was one particular one. It was from January 20th of 2023 through January 22nd of 2023, where there was a damage report from the London hotel, and it was for $3,750, and the total charge was more than $7,000 for this particular hotel booking. That hotel was booked under a Joseph Chavez, aka Joey Chavez, and I think another assistant. And this particular damage report was because of the bodily fluids that were stained on this particular floor. The names associated with that particular booking were Jane, Sean Combs, Paul, Reggie, and Cabral. These were entertainers that Jane and Sean Combs would use together, according to Jane's testimony. And then there were exhibits shown to the jury about text messages between Paul and Jane. And then there were texts between Jane and Cabral, where Cabral is saying, what's up, beautiful? I'm in town until the 23rd. Jane is saying, hey, we're doing the London hotel. Then the jury was able to see more bank records, these being around that same time frame, a $900 cash deposit, a $600 cash deposit. And so really just putting the pieces of the puzzle together in terms of who was all there, how much money was spent, what hotel was this at, what location was this at, and who flew from where to what, and what type of money was used in order to kind of facilitate these Wild King nights or hotel nights.
And that's why I think witnesses like this, summary witnesses that talk about the records, it feels to me those two charges, transportation to engage in prostitution, are the most straightforward path to conviction on those charges for Sean Combs. Out of everything else that he faces, racketeering, sex trafficking, those, because of the records, because of the testimony, it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough for defense attorneys to fight back against this. Elizabeth, one more thing I wanted to ask you about this. I understand there were text messages and audio that was played for the jury today. And what, first of all, was it played for the jury, or was it played outside the presence of the jury? The messages, I think, from Jane, messages from Cassie, audio of Sean Combs. If you could real quick summarize what this was, and was it played in front of the jury?
It was played in front of the jury, but what was interesting, Jesse, is that there was no witness to really kind of explain these particular text messages. So the jury was just hearing a whole bunch of text messages and audio messages, just I think with kind of no context, because there were even times, honestly, I was sitting there listening to all of this, and I'm like, why are they just throwing all these text messages at these jurors like this? So they were present, they were able to hear and see all these messages. So for example, there were messages between Sean Combs and Christina Coram from April 25th of 2023, where Sean Combs is asking, okay, well, after studio, I'm going off the grid until 12 p.m. I'm done, not speaking anymore. Christina Coram goes, and again, always paraphrasing here, there were a lot more messages that were laid out in front of the jury, but I was only able to write as fast as I can. But Christina Coram responds, okay, for off the grid moment, can you use Joey? Try having fun at the game. Then we see another message where Diddy says, I want Frank, I can't take anymore, album not done, other things weren't done, and he seemed kind of upset about it through this particular message. Christina responds, I'll call Frank now, sending someone to Frank's apartment. And so then there was another message from May 15th of 2023. Diddy is writing, okay, who can set up room? Christina Coram is like, I'll get candles. Can they go now? Diddy responds, who is it? And then we hear an audio message for Sean Combs where he is messaging Christina Coram again through audio message. I thought you said you didn't want Brendan brought in. Then Christina Coram writes in a text message, I don't, but he's at the house. Then there's another audio message from Diddy where he says, have Jonathan do it. Yeah, have Jonathan do it. That's literally what he said. And then Christina Coram said, okay, John will go to the hotel. Diddy responds, I need John to go here now, or to get her now, excuse me. And Christina Coram responds, okay, he's going to her now. Then they kind of go back a little bit in time to the time where Sean Combs and Cassie were in a relationship together. We see the flight summary chart and the text messages between Cassie and Sean Combs from March 12th of 2017. So again, that time frame when the two were still kind of dating again, in that on and off 11-year period that the two were together, where Diddy writes to Cassie, do you want me to hit Garen for big man? LOL. Cassie responds, you can if you want. You only sent one pic. Then Diddy responds, again, more messages are kind of in between this, where he's saying, okay, room 491. And then he's saying, call me. And then Cassie responds, really? I think it'll always be black and white. You throw out all my SHIT. You busted my head in. Then Diddy responds, let's stop talking. You're flipping on me for what? Cassie responds, I'm at the door. Let me know what you need me to do. Diddy responds, okay, we're taking a break. Figure it out. And then Cassie responds, I'm not down with abuse. You hit me in my head 2 good times. I know I'm not crazy. Then Diddy responds, I'm hurt. I'm tired of this Then Cassie responds, okay. Then we see messages from the next day. Diddy is responding, did you get any female escort nums? Possibly meaning numbers. And then Cassie said, at this point, you've been telling me and I'm listening. She says more things. I had fun in Miami. You treat me like a hooker. And then we see messages from around the time frame where Sean Combs and Cassie went to the Met Gala together, because we saw a picture of the two of them at the Met Gala. And then there were some text messages that accompanied kind of around that appearance, where Cassie writes, that was you. You hurt me so bad and so heartbroken. Some of your wires are loose. I might say bull here and there, but I'm not a bad person. I don't know what you expect out of me sometimes. This isn't play fighting anymore, and my heart is shattered for what you did. Boris had to tackle you. And Diddy responds, that makes 2 of us. You don't treat me like a king. Any other woman in the world would be happy. You need to ask someone how you were acting, always talking back. Cassie responds, talk to your people, they'll tell you. And I didn't ask to go to the Met. I asked for my record to come out. Then the defense kind of objected to this once the jury was dismissed for a quick break, because they were like, these messages that you're presenting to the jury aren't showing the full context. There are more messages that come up after this, and they were about 2 pages long, where Cassie says to Diddy, I love our freak-offs when we both want them. And then the government had to kind of read those out loud in order, because it seemed like the defense was really upset that the government was only kind of painting one side of the picture. Then the government was like, okay, we don't have to show the full context of this when we don't have a witness on the stand. And so what they ended up doing was just kind of like, okay, we'll just, meet in the middle here. The government ended up presenting the full context of these messages. And so they were able to see that ending line, especially where Cassie said, and this is something that the defense definitely wanted the jury to hear, that Cassie said, I love our FOs when we both want them. And so They ended up reading that message in full to the jury in order to kind of show the full picture.
It's a gray picture, right? It's a gray picture. Is it sex trafficker victim or is it toxic relationship of boyfriend-girlfriend? That's going to be up for the jury to decide. Now, before I let you go, Elizabeth, one final thing. We found out the schedule. We found out when this trial is going to wrap up, and I think it tells us a lot about the defense's case, doesn't it?
Tells us a lot, and it's coming to an end very quickly. I really wasn't expecting things to just really kind of fly by just as fast as they have, especially in these last couple of weeks. But it seems like because we kind of had that delay on Wednesday when the juror got sick, and then we had Thursday off of court and everyone was celebrating the Juneteenth holiday, that initially the government wanted to rest their case this Friday, but obviously that didn't happen. So they plan on resting at least on Monday. Then what's going to happen is the defense is going to take over. But before Mark Agnifilo was saying that they planned on having their case be about 2 to 5 trial days, Mark Agnifilo said to the judge today he doesn't plan on their case in chief being really that long. He says that they plan on resting as early as next Tuesday or Wednesday. Obviously, they kind of have to make sure that they go over the jury instructions and all of that stuff, and they'll have like another kind of talking about that next week too. But we could see closing arguments as early as next Thursday. And then obviously after closings, there's long jury instructions for the jury to kind of get this case. And then deliberations could happen very quickly.
Yeah, how long it'll take to come back is a different question. Look, if they're serious that is how short the defense's case is, it tells me two things. One, Sean Combs is probably not going to take the stand, or at least he alerted that to his defense attorneys. He may change his mind over the weekend, because if he was planning to testify, this trial would be a lot longer. And two, they may feel they don't have to present as much of a defense. They may feel confident in their cross-examination of key witnesses that they've raised enough reasonable doubt, or that some of these messages, these text messages that have come out, help their case and they hurt the prosecution's case. So we shall see. Elizabeth Millner, thank you so much for great reporting, as always. And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.